Really? Seriously? The college football playoffs are just too big to rig? Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week I'm going to be a little bit prideful and talk about probably my two favorite teams in all of college football because they are meeting on the gridiron this week, specifically over in New Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. And of course, I'm talking about one of the great nicknames of all time, attached to them by their great coach, Earl Red Blake, and that is the Black Knights of the Hudson of West Point, Army football, and of course, the Fighting Irish, another great nickname given to the Irish in a very condescending way by a rival coach. And of course, we're talking about the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Both teams have a great and long history in college football. However, both, after about the 1940s, and I'm going to extend it to the 1950s, when Army still had some great teams. In fact, on that 1958 team, which is really the last year, I want to focus on a couple of years in particular. 1958, when the great Army team was undefeated except for one tie against Pittsburgh, and they met Notre Dame. It was a big game when they met the Irish, but it was only the third game of the year. Now, yes, I know that's a third of the season because mostly they played 8 or 9 games that year. Neither Army nor Notre Dame at that time went to bowl games. But that Army team under Earl Red Blake defeated Notre Dame 14-2. I got to put this up again because that team was led by Pete Dawkins, who would later on win the Heisman Trophy for the 1958 season. And of course, Army, they were 8-0-1. They had started the preseason as number 9, rose to number 1, and finished after that tie. They never climbed higher. Well, never climbed higher, but they finished third in the land with the AP. Now, you got to remember that the AP used to do their final polls before the bowl games were played. And that's why you'll see some teams, and I'm thinking this 1973, Notre Dame defeated Alabama in the Sugar Bowl that year, but yet the AP, I believe, had them behind Alabama in their final poll, but that was taken before the bowl game season and before that game was ever played. And of course, I've talked about that. Being a Notre Dame fan, it's still probably the greatest game I ever saw in my life. I was 13. I was in 8th grade watching that game, black and white set with my dad, probably with my whole family. I just remember there were 6 lead changes. Yes, the game wasn't particularly a thing of beauty, lots of fumbles, but it was back and forth. And then finally, of course, Tom Clemens completes the pass to Robin Weber to seal the deal with about 30 seconds left. And of course, in that game in particular, Bear Bryant elects to punt. He was in Notre Dame territory, punts the ball. It goes down to the Notre Dame 1 or 2 yard line where it's down by Alabama. Notre Dame is thwarted on 2 rushing plays, and on 3rd down, they just pull off a miraculous. They just throw the ball downfield. It's caught. I think it was the only catch by Robin Weber in his whole entire Notre Dame career. And of course, that seals the deal, gives the Irish their first national championship that I ever saw. I mean, I was alive for the 66 team, which we've talked about with the 10-10 tie with Michigan State, but I was too young and don't remember ever watching that game. My dad did, and my brothers probably certainly did, but I did not. My first real impression of Notre Dame and my first experience with the Fighting Irish was against the Army Black Knights at Yankee Stadium in 1969. Of course, the Irish won that game. Notre Dame, they've always had great programs. They've had some lulls, particularly I think of, unfortunately, with the Jerry Faust and other coaches who basically followed him after Lou Holtz. But Notre Dame had some lulls in the 50s and early 60s. In fact, that lull, I think Hugh DeVore was the coach and had some just rough seasons, even though he coached a Heisman Trophy winner in Paul Hornung. Nevertheless, the Irish were never that good in the early 60s. Lo and behold, out of Northwestern comes Ara Parseghian, and history again is rewritten for the Irish as Era leads them not just to one championship, but to two. In fact, that 73 team, unbeaten, untied, was his last championship. He won in 66 and he won in 73, and of course retires after the 74 season with a stunning upset of really what's turned into a pretty good rivalry with Alabama, with the history that they've had. Their first meetings, I believe, were in the bowl games, and then they've had Alabama's gotten the best of Notre Dame in the last, I would say, 15 years. It's not like they meet every year, but I'm just saying. And he stunned Alabama, beat them 13-10. This is after USC just totally obliterated any hopes for Notre Dame having back-to-back national championships. I even mentioned that last week. Down 24-0 right before half. Anthony Davis, of course, runs back a kickoff touchdown, and then they proceed to just come out and just wallop Notre Dame in the second half, scoring 55 consecutive points and beat them 55-24. 58 happened to be the last time that Army defeated Notre Dame, so I should make a big deal of it. They beat them 14-2, but the game was not played at Yankee Stadium. It was played in South Bend, and like I said, it was played first. It was the third game of the year. The Irish, after that game, they were 2-0 going into that game. They lose. They would finish the season 6-4. So really, after that game, the Irish just kind of fell fell apart. Didn't play Notre Dame football. Still finished with a winning record. They were 6-4, 6-4-1, but were never the same after that. On the other side, Army continued its winning ways, with the only blemish being that 14-14 tie with Pitt. And it's interesting because in 1958, ready for this, the NCAA champion for 1958 happened to be at the end of the year. And of course, Army didn't go to a bowl game. The coach of the year would be Paul Dietzel, who led LSU to the number one finish in the polls. Actually, in 1958, here's how it finished. LSU finished first, Iowa second, Army third, Auburn, Oklahoma. Air Force finished sixth. Wisconsin, Ohio State, Syracuse, Texas, Christian. Notre Dame finished 17th that year, so they did kind of make a comeback. But Notre Dame finished 6-4 that season. And Army, of course, finished 8-0-1. Pretty good season by them. Now, here is the problem with Army after that. They never really, their program went kind of south, to be honest with you. They had some good seasons, but not like they're having right now. This kid, Bryce Daly, has really led Army to an incredible look. Here's the deal. Army, independent for so many years, they had been technically, they were part of Conference USA for about 5-6 years. Were not successful in it at all. In fact, their overall record from 1998 until they left the conference in 2004, they won a total of 6, 7, 10, 13 games. And most of them were not in Conference USA. They lost 22, 33, 41, 51, 59, and 67 games, 13 and 67. So they leave the conference. They've been independent ever since until this year, when they were basically, in many respects, because of these mega conferences that you're seeing with the Big Ten and the Big 12, the SEC, and now the ACC, kind of forced Army's hand a little bit. So they joined the AAC, the American Athletic Conference, and lo and behold, they are right now 7-0. They've already clinched the spot in the championship game after Notre Dame, and I'm not looking past Notre Dame in any shape or form, but they do have one more conference game, technically, because the Navy game is not technically a conference game. They kept that separate. But they have Texas San Antonio on the Friday of Thanksgiving. Then, the following week, if they can win that game, I do believe they will host the championship game against Tulane. Now, both teams are unbeaten, but I think it goes down to, well, obviously if Army can win that game against UTSA, they would be unbeaten. But I think it comes down to winning percentage. Tulane has lost twice already. So if Army, let's just say they lost to Notre Dame, they would only have one loss going into there. They would have the higher winning percentage, I believe, and they would be hosting the game up at Mikey in December. How exciting is that for the Black Knights? I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on. I knew that they were, put it this way, I knew that they had finished the season on a high note. They finished 6-6. They were at one point, I think, like 2-6 and won their last 4 straight. They currently have the longest unbeaten streak in the nation. And they're one of 3 teams unbeaten as I am going into taping this show today, with the others being Indiana and Oregon. So they've had an unbelievable year. When I tell you this has been incredible, and the thing that has done them so well has been just a timely defense. Timely, that's a euphemism for bend but don't break. They haven't given up a lot of points. In fact, they've given up, they're averaging fewer than 10 points a game. At one point, you had to go all the way back to like 1966 for Army after Game 8 for a team that gave up fewer points than Army has this year. And of course, with the offense being what it is today, that really is a great indication of great coaching and just players buying into, and I hate using that, but it's a cliche, buying into the defensive system and really working on all cylinders all the time. They've really had a successful year. Now, lo and behold, nobody, I'm telling you, nobody, if they're going to be honest with you, never thought, one, Army would be unbeaten. Number 2, they would be ranked. Number 3, that they would be ranked, unbeaten, win the conference championship in their first year in, and not only that, but have a chance to be in the college football playoffs. Outside chance as it may. And now they are playing Notre Dame. And this game harkens to maybe 1958, but I think it harkens to the 40s, the World War II era of the 40s. I'm speaking specifically about 1944, 45, and 46, when the Irish and Army met on the field of battle 3 consecutive years, and it ended up 1-1-1. And Army besting them. Well, let's just go back to 1944, okay? Their coach at that time was Earl Blake. Here he is with, I tell you, there's something about that, with these guys wearing the hat, the coat, the blazer, the suit jacket, the tie. Something about that just rings of college football more than anything else. Their coach was Ed McKenzie. It was not Hugh DeVore, nor was it Frank Leahy. Let's go back to 1944, because actually Notre Dame had 3 different coaches for those 3 different games that were played. And of course, those are the great Army teams of Blanchard and Davis. I always get them confused. I'm sorry. This is what I like about my doing this show, is that it really does. There's no such thing as an expert, nor do I ever consider myself a sports expert, because every time I go back, I learn so much more. And I'll tell you what, here's what I learned today. 1958, that game, I didn't realize it was played at South Bend. And then as you're starting to do the research, you realize, wait a minute, that's the last time that Army beat them. Because I do remember Army losing by a point to Notre Dame in the Meadowlands, 28-27. They had a chance to go for 2 points. And Notre Dame's defense thwarted it. And, of course, Army came away on the short end of a great contest. Notre Dame wasn't that good that year. This was really in the waning days of the Lou Holtz regime. But nevertheless, Army still has not beaten Notre Dame since 1958. But anyway, let's go back to that 44. This was the juggernaut. that Army had. They go 9-0, and in 1946 they go 9-0-1. Then they have a lull. They go 5-2-2 in 1947. Then they go 8-0-1 in 48 and finish sixth in the final polls. I'm going to use Football References. It's a great website. I'm going to use the final AP post. And they finished sixth that year at 8-0-1 in 1948. 1949, 9-0. 1950, 8-1. Have a lull, 2-7, 4-4-1. Then bring it up. Red Blake brings them to 7-1-1, 7-2 in 54. Down year for Army, 6-3, 5-3-1, 7-2. And then really the last great year for Army was 8-0-1, the Dawkins Heisman Trophy year. Now, does Army have winning seasons after that? Yes, they do. Are they ranked? Well, the highest rank they were was 1962, but they finished 6-4 and out of the rankings by the end of the year. So from 1962 all the way to 1985, Army didn't sniff the top 20. In 85, they had a great season. They were 8-0 to start the year, and they lost two of their last four games. They lost to Air Force 45-7, beat Memphis 49-7, lost to Navy 17-7, and then beat Illinois in the Peach Bowl. That was a great game. So they finished. Their only other loss was, of course, to Notre Dame in 1985. Getting back, though, to the 44. Ready for this? Army's teams that year were just incredible. This is what makes this team fun. Army's team this year had four consecutive games where they scored 40 or more points. They hadn't done that since those great years of 44, 45, and 46. That's where we are with this team right now. Now, look, I'm the last guy to say that this team is some new juggernaut, that they're the Alabama. This is just a once-in-a-generation for Army. For Notre Dame, which plays for the national title every year, they have a good, solid team. That little blip on the radar, losing to NIU, is killing them right now. But it's just one of those things. But if you've seen them play lately, they are. I will say this. I will be, let's say, their biggest critic. I'm not crazy about their running game, but they keep scoring. I'm not crazy about their passing game, but they keep scoring. I like their defense, but I got some issues maybe with their pass defense, but they keep winning. So every time I find something wrong with them, they keep winning. They have a nice coach, Marcus Freeman. It's not a nice coach. I think he's really developing into what is going to be a super coach. They probably have that guy that they can probably run with for a national championship. This year, maybe. But certainly somewhere down the line. And the funny thing is, Notre Dame has gone the longest in their whole history since 1988 to present day without winning a national title. Yes, true. I've said this before. They've gone to, I think, 3 different quote-unquote college football playoffs, but they came up short. The team looks pretty good. Now they got Army, and this is why this is just such a big game, because you have 2 ranked teams, Notre Dame and Army. They haven't been ranked, and for Army, they haven't been unbeaten this late in the season since those 1940s. And when they met Notre Dame on the playing field, ready for this? I just want to give you an indication of how good this Army team. They started out, they finished number 1. They scored 504 points. Now the present team has scored about 380. They still got 120 points, and at least you can say they could score the 500 points, but they have quite a few more games to play. They're guaranteed, actually, Notre Dame, UTSA. They have the conference championship, and of course they got the game against Navy. So if their offense continues at a 38, I think they're at 37.5 clip right now, they should be the all-time or highest scoring offensive team. Yes, I know. It's extra games that they're playing and all the rest of it. Nevertheless, it would be a record. Ready for this? They only gave up 35 points, that Army team. You talk about a team collecting shutouts. I mean, it's almost like they had one, two, three, four shutouts that year. They allowed the opposition no more than 7 points at any time all year. And it's not like they beat Little Sisters of the Poor in that first 1944 when they played Notre Dame. They beat North Carolina, which was in the Southern Conference then. They beat them 46-0. They beat Brown. Now look, the Ivies were really good. Was a really good conference. Well, technically, it doesn't become a conference until the late 50s. I think maybe even earlier, maybe about 54, 55. But those teams in the Northeast, this is why it's such a huge game. College football was bigger than pro football. And college football was as followed back in the 40s and probably the 50s in the Northeast as it was in the Southeast and the Big Ten. Pro football came along. The Giants were really good. This corridor has always been professional sports. Let's face it. From Boston, Philly, New York, and even down to Washington. But at one point in those 40s, that's why they played college football. That's why they had the basketball games at Madison Square Garden. There was a huge following of college sports here in the Northeast, specifically here in the New York metropolitan area. Anyway, getting back, North Carolina, 46-0. Brown, 59-7. Pitt, the team that they would later tie in 1958. Pitt's always had some they have a pretty good history, too. Won a couple of national titles. Had, of course, Tony Dorsett as that team. That 76 team was awesome. All right. Pitt, they beat the Coast Guard 76-0, which is not their biggest gap in winning or the largest winning margin. They beat Duke 27-7. They beat Nova 83-0. They beat Penn, which had an unbelievable football program. They destroyed them 62-7. And then they beat Navy, which was ranked number 2, December 2nd, 1944. They beat them 23-7. Ready for this? Notre Dame, when they met on that Saturday, November 11th, 1944, Notre Dame was 5th ranked in the country. Notre Dame got beat 59-0. They were down 33-0 at half, and Notre Dame was just devastated. They actually finished the season 8-2 that year. The coach was Ed McKeever. Like I said, he was replacing the regular coach, Frank Leahy, who had gone off to war. Ready for this? Notre Dame was no slouch. They beat Pitt 58-0. They beat Tulane, which was in the Southeast Conference, 26-0. They beat Dartmouth 64-0. They beat Wisconsin 28-13, which was called the Western Conference then before the Big Ten, I think, is named Big Ten about 57-58. Illinois ranked 14th. They beat them 13-7. Navy ranked 6th. They lose to Navy 32-13. In back-to-back weeks, they lose by a total of 91-13 to the military academies, Navy and Army. Come back on November 18th and defeat Northwestern 21-0, then beat, to finish out the season, number 10 Georgia Tech 21-0, and number 12 in the land, Great Lakes Navy. They beat them 28-7. Notre Dame that year finished the season 8-2. They finished 9th in the AP poll. Ready for this? Just to give you a little history. Army finishes first. They have Les Horvath actually wins from Ohio State the Heisman Trophy. So Davis and Blanchard will have to wait a little bit about that. Ohio State finished second. Randolph Field finished third. Navy finished fourth. Bainbridge, NTS finished fifth. Iowa Pre-Flight sixth. USC finished seventh. Michigan 8th, Notre Dame 9th, and Marshfield 10th. Duke, though, an opponent of Army. Georgia Tech, an opponent of Notre Dame. Illinois, an opponent of Notre Dame. Great Lakes Navy, an opponent of Notre Dame. all were in the top 20. So these teams that met on that field that day, even though Army just destroyed them, 59-0, they were still a good team. Now, the next year, this is 1945. Army again is number one. This time, the route is on by Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat them 48-0. I just want to go back to Army that year. Here's their schedule. So it ends up 1-1-1, this 3-game series, when you think about it. But here is the two guys, Blanchard and Davis. All right. They are the stars of these 40s teams. Here's who Army beat to start the season. Again, Blake rolls up enough goose eggs. Woof, their defense is not as good. They gave up 5.1 on the average, and their offense 100 points down, or almost 100 points down. They scored 45.8 points a game. Here's who they beat. Louisville Field, 32-0. Wake Forest in the Southern, 54-0. Number 9, Michigan, 28-7. Melville PT Boats, what a great name for this stuff, 55-13. Duke, 48-13. You got to remember, too, here's the thing that made Army so good in the 40s and Navy is that they got the cream of the crop in terms of football talent because they just drafted them and then gave them probably the option of attending the military academy or going right into the Army. So you have to admit that Army played it as best they could. Hey, listen, they're gonna get their advantages, just like the teams are getting their advantages today, where Army can't give NIL deals. Well, here's Army besting the rest of the colleges by, you know what, doing a little looking for the loopholes. Villanova, they beat 54-0. They just destroyed Villanova. They scored basically, 130 points in 2 games. No, they beat Notre Dame 48-0. They beat Penn 61-0. And they beat Navy 32-13. So I have to amend my statement there. It was not 1-1-1. It was 0-2-1 if you're a Notre Dame fan, 2-0-1 if you're an Army fan. But I will tell you this. From what I understand about the 0-0 time, we're about to get into that in a little bit, it was more like a win for Notre Dame. Obviously, you can tell why. They beat them 48-59-0, giving up 107 points in them in 2 games. And really, Army, if you think that they were playing tomato cans, they beat Michigan 9th, Notre Dame 2, Penn 6, and Navy number 2. So that's 4 more teams in the top 10 that they face that they go on and defeat. And then in the 46th season, in this game, ready? Just to give you an idea, Notre Dame and Army come into this game, which ends in a 0-0 tie. Army again beats Villanova to start the season 35-0. There were more points scored against Army this time, but they did have another 4 shutouts. They beat Oklahoma, which was in the Big Six. They beat them 21-7. Cornell. And by the way, a shout out. This is off. You know, when Army went out there a few years ago to play Oklahoma, it was a great game. And it came down to, I think it was overtime. Oklahoma defeats Army in overtime. And Army had a shot at winning the game. Okay, so they lose. As they're leaving the field, Oklahoma fans give the Black Knights of the Hudson a standing ovation. True class by the Oklahoma fans. I just want to tell you that. Cornell, independent, would be a member of the Ivy League eventually. They beat them 46-21. Beat number 4 Michigan 20-13. Beat number 11 Columbia 48-14. Boy, they pasted fellow New York school, Columbia. Beat Duke 19-0, which was ranked 13. Beat West Virginia 19-0. Beat Pennsylvania 34-7, which was ranked 5. And then beat Navy 21-18 to finish with a 9-0-1 record. The Notre Dame game finished 0-0, and I just want to tell you this. I am almost certain that if you talk to the real experts, the real football, college football experts, the guys who know the history, I do believe that Notre Dame was seen as a huge underdog in that game, and playing to a 0-0 tie was just unbelievable. It was basically a win. I don't know whether, and Frank Leahy comes back from the war. He leads them to an 8-0-1 record in 46. And here's how I know it was a win for the Irish, that 0-0 tie. Because Notre Dame started off the season as preseason. They were third in the AP poll. They move up to 2 when they play Army. Now, just follow this. First game of the year, they beat Illinois 26-6. They beat Pitt 33-0. And I'll just, on a side, it's amazing how many games Pitt and Notre Dame have actually played. It's unbelievable. And actually, I think in the Big Ten, I think Notre Dame has probably played Michigan State more than Purdue. Everybody thinks that it's Michigan, Notre Dame. It's a big rivalry. It's not. I always thought when I was a kid, they played Michigan State. They always played 3 teams, Notre Dame. Northwestern, as a kid, I remember, they played Purdue and Michigan State. And that Purdue game was always key, because if they won that game, then you knew they were going to have a pretty good season. Anyway, in my final minute here, 2 minutes, Illinois, Pitt, Purdue. Purdue, they lashed 49-6. They beat number 17 Iowa, a team I still have not seen Notre Dame play. Would love to see a matchup there. Navy, 28-0. They beat Northwestern 27-0. Tulane, 41-0, which was still in the SEC. And then they beat, in the Pacific Coast Conference, USC, which was ranked 16th. They beat them November 30th, 26-6. Now, why do I save this Notre Dame? And this is why I think it was a real upset. And, of course, let's bring in some of the characters and all the rest of it. Okay, is this. Army's number 1. Notre Dame's number 2. They played in the Bronx, probably seen as a home field for Army at the time. They hold the running game of Army to no points. Now, I'm not saying that Notre Dame, which had a pretty lethal offense as well, they scored 30 points a game, only 271. Their defense, though, was slightly better, only gave up 24 points all year, 2.7 average per game. But watch this. After that 0-0 tie, Notre Dame is still number 2 when they beat Northwestern. Notre Dame is still number 2 when they beat Tulane. Notre Dame is still number 2 when they beat number 16 USC. But they finish first in the final AP poll. And I do believe Glenn Davis, of course, wins the Heisman Trophy that year. I do believe, I don't want to do that. I do believe it's because of the tie, and maybe they were looking at the overall thing, because Notre Dame, how is it that they were number 2, and then on the final poll of the year, Army, which in their own say, Army, which after the tie beats Penn 34-7, narrowly beats Navy, which probably hurt them, especially after Notre Dame beats a number of ranked teams and then beats really their arch rival on the road, USC. And I would say that 0-0 tie, kind of like the 10-10 tie from 1966, helps Notre Dame and hurts Army. And proof is in the pudding, because Notre Dame finishes number 1. They don't beat them in those 3 matchups, but the tie gives them a national championship. A game for a lifetime, a generation, is going to be held this Saturday at New Yankee Stadium between the Army Black Knights of the Hudson and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. It's prime time, and I am hoping it's that both teams give a good display of their talent and what they've been doing all year. If Army's to win the game, they got to control the clock. I'm not telling you anything new. It's all cliche. No turnovers. That's a cliche. Yes, that's a secret of winning. I know. They got to score more points. That's the bottom line. Nobody ever talks about it as keys to the game. Score more points and allow fewer, and you'll win the game. But if Notre Dame, in all honesty, that game against North Texas State, if Army can control the ball for like 13 minutes like they did on that one drive, limit the number of possessions for Notre Dame, they may be able to squeak out like a 19-18 lead. I almost see it like going like this, two ways. Army blitzes them early, takes like a 14-0 lead, and manages to hang on at the very end with Notre Dame. Maybe they knock the ball down right before the end zone to win the game. I see Notre Dame winning this game two ways. They come from behind, beat them like 27-17, or just, unfortunately, maybe Notre Dame is too strong with the pass, and they beat them, let's say, 35-14. But in either way, I hope you enjoy the game. It's going to be, I think, a great game. It'll be a fun game, and it will be a salute to not just the players of today, but to the past. Two legendary programs, Notre Dame and the Army Black Knights of the Hudson. This is Will O'Toole thanking you again for joining me. I'll be back with another edition of Park Ridge Sports History next week. Thanks again.